Welcome to Intuition Unleashed, a revolution in personal liberation. The go-to podcast that helps you access intuitive guidance combined with mental health and spirituality. Let your intuition guide you and unlock a life of true liberation. And now your host, Becc Nelson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Intuition Unleashed. It's a revolution in personal liberation. Speaking of personal liberation, wow, have I got a story for you today and a guest for you. This is my friend, Libba Phillips. Libba, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
We're so glad to have you. What a story we have for you today. Not just a story about how you got here, up to this point in your life, but also just how we were on together today, all divinely guided, some of which I just found out last night when we were texting each other. I was like, well, goosebumps everywhere. So I cannot wait to share this all with you. So Libba is actually an angel communicator, a spiritual guide, an intuitive coach. So many things that we're going to explore today, but she really began in a way that she was a skeptic in the beginning. These are never things that she believed in angels and messages, etc. And sometimes it takes some really messed up stories to crack us wide open, and we find healing and growth in the places that we never expected. So this is a story that I can't wait for you guys to hear about. I want to tell you that one of the first conversations that I actually had with Libba, we've known each other for a bit. And one time I had a conversation with her because she said to me, hey, I want to write a book about my life. Now, this is before I knew all the other stuff. And she says, can we meet so I can try to get an idea of how you go about writing a book? So we meet and I'm like, sure, that's great. I love talking about that. And then we start talking and I realized that she has a Lifetime movie, y'all, about her life. And her character was played by A.J. Cook, who is now, as many of you know, on Criminal Minds. So I'm like, wait a minute. Your story was in People magazine, and you had a story made about you in a Lifetime movie, and you're asking me for guidance? No. So I want to talk all day. No. So I need to let you talk, but it's going to be very difficult for me to not interject my own questions. So please, can you, the name of the Lifetime movie, which is pretty easy to find on YouTube, but no longer on Lifetime, tell us all about it. Tell us from the beginning. And we're going to start with your grandfather, right?
Okay. So the name of the movie is Bringing Ashley Home, and the movie came out in 2011, but the actual story behind the movie really starts a long time before that. So you have to go all the way back to the late 90s, 1998. And this is when my younger sister, Ashley, disappeared. So just to paint the picture for a moment, she was struggling with some mental health issues and a drug addiction. She was actually in a treatment facility, and she was released without anyone notifying my family. She walked out of the door into the parking lot, out onto the streets, and she was gone. And, on its own, people might go, okay, well, that happens. People walk away from treatment all the time. But what happened to Ashley was we didn't know. She went into the abyss, and she actually was several weeks of my parents trying to get her reported as missing. And no law enforcement officer would take the report. And the Cliff Notes version of that is it would actually take many years. But to keep you into that time and what was happening, it was quite despairing. If you ever have had a lost dog, you might make your own poster, you tack it up on the telephone pole. And that's really where we were. We couldn't get anyone to help us. We knew that Ashley was very vulnerable and very sick. And as we began searching onto the streets, it's certainly not safe for anybody's dog. It's definitely not safe for anyone's daughter, or sister who's mentally unwell and very vulnerable. I was at that time in the corporate world. So my life was, as a pharmaceutical sales rep, was focused on sales quotas, presentations, just get up in the morning, do your work, come home. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, we just need to put the information together, take it, present it, we'll get on the news, and we can find her. That'll be the end of it, right? That's not what happened, because people did not want to give us the time of day. So we were making our own handmade flyers, putting them on telephone poles, walking into businesses, convenience stores, homeless shelters, even hospitals, and as weeks turned into months, it started to become really despairing, really devastating. I actually was living in another state. I was living across country in California. I was flying home to Florida to help my parents. And, there was no Facebook then. There was no candlelight vigil. There were no volunteers canvassing the streets, right? There was no, like you see the missing lady on the cover of People magazine. There was none of that was happening for us. I couldn't be seen by any media just because there was no missing persons report. And so that was a real kick in the gut because, to us, she was vulnerable and lost and most likely being exploited. To them, she was, well, if she gets caught doing something illegal, then it's our problem. Right?
We're going to wait till there's a problem before we do it.
Right, wait till there's a problem. So, as we are working to include things like morgues in our searches, trying to sort of find somebody. This was like looking for a needle. And, at the time, I was really taking this very personally, an insult altogether, where my mom said, hey, you need to get back on a plane. You need to come back home. Your grandfather's dying in the middle of this. Okay. So this actually had been a couple months down the road. Okay. So I should preface this by saying that, my grandfather was a minister. He was the only really solid source of spiritual support that I had had in my life. You might go, well, wait a minute, I thought you were a skeptic. I was. I thought, well, if God existed, maybe my grandfather would have kind of an inside scoop on that. But, my childhood was very difficult. There was a lot of abuse and a lot of difficult things that made me wonder, who's this God guy? He's certainly not here helping me. And
is your
God was it.
This is your mother's father or your father's father then?
My mother's father. And so my granddad, one of his dying wishes was to pray, with people in the family. And so he said he wanted to pray with me. I'm just going to indulge him,
Here's a dying man.
If God's there, he's, I don't know, he's not going to hear this prayer. So my grandfather said to me, listen, everyone on the planet has a purpose. And when I get there, I'm going to see about that. My grandfather died about 24 hours later. I had to be back on a plane, back to California for a sales meeting with my regional manager. Within days, my whole world just went kaboom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now this is like stuff, because I watched the movie. None of this is a movie about your grandfather.
Right. Yeah. So anyone that's seen the movie, or if you happen to see the movie, in the near future, what I'll say about that now as a little sidebar is that the movie spans, when you make a Lifetime movie or a Hallmark movie, they're generally about 89 minutes. And when the movie was made, it was covering the first 4 years of the search. So I'll go ahead and give away a few things now, meaning that search for my sister, it encompassed many, 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 many years. If I had known then, in 1998, if I had believed that God existed and God said, hey, guess what? This is going to take a really long time, so giddy up. I would have said, forget it. No way. I had no idea what I was in for. But back in those days, after my granddad passed, here I am sitting, I'm angry. I'm sad. I'm like, okay, my sister's missing. My grandfather just died. He told me he's going to tell God all about this when he gets there, but I just got my boss on my ASS about getting back to work, right? So I began having, for lack of a better description, I began having like sort of dreams. I started to have I call them downloads now. Then I didn't know what to call them. I just thought, oh, this must be crazy. I would get sort of this intuitive ideas like, hey, you're going to do something about this. And I'm like, okay, who's talking? And I began to feel my grandfather's presence. It's a really hard thing to, I'd be asleep and I would wake up and just have that sense that, he's here, like, his, I mean, I didn't have the word for it then, but like his energy, like I would use that word freely now, but then I'm just kind of like, oh, you're just nuts. You're going on too much caffeine and not enough sleep.
Yeah.
And so
Grief.
I start to write down things that feel to me like, I'll call them intuitive nudges. They were like ideas. And one day I'm in my car and I have him in my ear, basically. And he's saying, everything is going to be okay. You're just going to need to stay open. I mean, and I would cry like, and I'm thinking, I'm losing my mind. So I'm at a stoplight. God, if you're really there, like you got to show me something that's so big. You got to show me that Ashley matters to you and that I am not absolutely bat crazy. Within seconds, this giant 18-wheeler semi-truck comes through the intersection, very slow, and on the side of it, bright red letters, ASHLEY.
Wow. Whoa, I just get goosebumps. Woo.
Okay. So I'm sitting there going, what? Now today I have friends and colleagues and clients I could say, that was so cool that just happened, right? Like we've done that where I've said, oh my God, this thing just happened. But in those days I'm like, what?
So I start crying. That was not real. I need a sign of your sign.
Okay. So I asked. So I'm still crying. I'm going down the road. And I say, I need more. Because again, these impressions in my mind are that it's not just my grandfather helping me, that there are angels helping me to start navigating this. I didn't have a word for it, this journey, whatever was about to happen. It was just a feeling of things are going to shift really quickly here. And I say, I don't know if I believe in this. Like I want to, but I need something more tangible. So I pull into the parking lot at like a Rite Aid, drugstore. And I say, I need something. But right now I got to go get shampoo. So I walk in. I'm still crying. I'm going to like aisle 2 to look for the shampoo. And all of a sudden, over the loudspeaker, I hear the very first sentence of the song, Calling All Angels. I need a sign. There's no music. I need a sign that you are here. And I'm just sitting there going, okay.
Yes.
So that's just to give you an example of, the very early days of awakening. But there was no instruction manual, there was no, I tried to tell, a person that was close to me at the time, this is what I think is happening. Like something's happening. Like my granddad's reaching out. I'm hearing from angels. And they're like, yeah, that's wishful thinking. Like, I get it. You're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should see a doctor. And I'm like, oh, you don't get to mansplain this, right?
Yeah.
But I needed confirmation, but I couldn't even give it to myself. Right.
I think you're making a great point here, Libba. Right now, it's when your support depends on who you decide to have around you. Yeah. And if you choose to be with people who don't believe in what you're saying, then that's you're going to reflect that inside yourself, and you're putting it out there, and that's who you're bringing to you. People who are like, you're nuts.
That's
you
right.
know, get it together, right?
Yeah.
In order to continue to grow, you really
Yes.
have to bring other people around you who believe in what you're
Yes.
doing and reflect what it is that's going on inside of you.
Exactly. And that's so important because I knew then I need people who will listen. Obviously, I wanted people that were going to be supportive, but I needed at that moment, what I needed was a megaphone for someone that was going to listen to me about Ashley, and someone that could help get her listed as a missing person, could get her in the system. Because what we were discovering, my family and I, we were discovering as we would go out onto the streets, is that there were quite a few people. Not every person that's homeless is lost, but many people who are lost and on the streets, they were lost long before it became their reality, right? Lots of people with mental illness and things like that. And so, you know, working the back channels, like talking to coroners and talking to forensic investigators, talking to some police and other agencies that would actually talk to us, but didn't have jurisdiction to file things, they were confirming a lot of the things that we were discovering, and they were horrendous. So yes, I needed to procure as much hope as I could at that time, because the daily, list, the daily rounds of information were so despairing. It was like, we're never going to find her. I'm never going to be able to help her.
And nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Am I the only person that cares whether I find her or
right.
not?
And I think that this is where, again, the part about unseen support, and I could tell you this now, I couldn't tell you this then, but I can say for certainty now, we're always helped. We're always helped. And even when we don't think that we are, there are things that are lining up for us, right? It's just up to us to notice, surround ourselves with the right people, if we can, and start to, I would say, be willing to believe, even if you can't believe yet that there's something more. Be willing to believe that there's something more you don't know, and that something could be happening on your behalf. Now, again, I was not a person that was conditioned as a child, to believe that. I didn't believe that I mattered or that I was worthy or any of those things. And so, just only had my grandfather and my grandparents saying, I love you, that kind of thing. And so the world was not really reflecting that, right? Well, one of the things that happened during this time was I just continued to get this feeling inside, like we're discovering all of this stuff, right? We're finding out that there's other people that are searching for loved ones on the streets. I'm keeping my notes, right? And I'm trying to get help from other agencies, not just law enforcement. I'm trying to seek out other missing persons agencies. Again, because we don't have the missing persons report, no one wants to talk to me, right? They say, oh, she's got a right to privacy, even homeless shelters, that kind of thing. So I'm thinking, I need to do something, but I don't really know what. And this goes into a little bit more detail in this in the movie, but I would just kind of give the short version here is that I was an artist in college, and I had a group of photographs and things that I would sometimes show. And Ashley used to go with me on these road trips. They were just like black and whites and landscapes across different places. And I just sort of had this idea like, hey, maybe I can do some kind of billboard thing, like the Lost Highway and, something that might create some kind of awareness, right? So I went into this camera place, and I was going to have somebody look at the work and just kind of give me an idea, like, who would I contact about creating something like this? And the woman that was going to meet me and look at the portfolio was not in. And rather, her colleague was there. And she said, oh, I can look at your work. And so she started to look at my work. And all of a sudden, I had this feeling like, gosh, have you ever had that feeling when you're in the room with somebody and you're like, I know them. Like this is more than a coincidence, right? Again, so it was one of those moments like I'm hearing like, what's that song, The Twilight Zone, in my head, and she starts looking through my work and she's like, wow, these are really great, and there's a lot of symbolism here. And she's like, so tell me a little bit more about your idea. And so I tell her, and she goes, well, why? And why are you doing this again? So I told her about Ashley. She was like the first person that really listened. And she looked me right in the eye. We'll never forget this. And she said, you're going to start a nonprofit organization.
Whoa.
It was like she was reading my mind, okay? Because I hadn't told her, hey, I've been collecting all this data. I just said, hey, we've been searching for my sister. We've been on the streets, you know, all these things. And in that moment, it was a knowing. Like that was one of the first times that I just had this, I could feel my whole body just sort of stand at attention and this flood of relief, like, okay, you got the next step. And I had been hearing, you know, you need to do something. I ended up going to the library. There was a flyer, how to start a nonprofit. And that's what led me ultimately, this is the short version, to starting an organization that ended up actually helping a lot of other people over time, you know, to look for their loved ones as well. But that woman became my best friend. We're best friends today. And she actually ended up advocating for my family. This is the short version. For those 4 years, first 4 early years. And ultimately, it was her results that were why Ashley finally got listed as a missing person. But it took 4 years.
Wow. And it was your nonprofit built around that time as well?
It was built around that time. So it was, you know, within about a year or so after Ashley's disappearance, you know, I was sort of, you know, getting the website built and things like that. I was starting to put information together. I was starting to meet people, you know, on the streets. It was really kind of interesting how, you know, that phrase, it sounds so cheesy, but it's true. If you build it, they will come. And I was also a volunteer at that time with an organization that would help look at cold cases and would help look at unidentified John and Jane Does, those kinds of cases of people that could not be identified, but were most likely, I mean, they all were somebody's missing loved one, right? So I was kind of, I guess, you know, what you would call, this was all like real groundwork at the time, not knowing what was being built, but based on what I was learning, I was trying to fill some gaps.
And this is the other important point, is intent.
Intent.
And you may not even know exactly what's going to come of it, but there's the energy of, I intend to do something that's going to help with this problem, because there's other families like that out there that are not being represented.
Yes.
And so from that intent, that energy. And
that's so powerful. And I know we have a break soon, but I want to circle back around to that intent, because I think that's very true. What you're saying is that even if you're in the middle of something that seems so unfathomable, like, what do I do next? Like maybe it's a health problem or, you know, something. And, you know, for me, it's like, I'm going to do something. I don't know what that something is. I think I have angels helping me. You know, I don't and I kept that close to my chest for a long time, because as I was starting to get a little bit more traction with the nonprofit work, you know, that's not something I would tell people, you know, hey, I'm Libba and I help find missing people, but I also hear angels, and they'd be like, oh, lady, get out of here. You know,
that's it. We're done.
Yeah, that's it. We're done. This conversation's over. Yeah. But what happened after that was pretty, speaking of intent, was really very powerful. And that's really what cemented my knowing. And I would just say to anyone out there, you know, that being willing, first of all, it's okay to admit, I don't know how it all works. Am I surrounding myself at least with one person that's in my corner, or positive books, or, you know, something that's going to kind of help fulfill me on days when things are very despairing? And what's my intent? Like, what is it that I want to happen? Right? We're kind of in the, like, I kind of think sometimes that manifestation, you know, people are thinking of it as a drive-through mentality. Like, hey, you know, order your coffee and this is what you get. But there's really so much more to it than that. with the intent and then being willing for the universe, and I use the language of God, God, to actually bring you something that you could never have imagined.
Mm-hmm. And so that's really what we're talking about here, that this story became how you figured out how to manifest.
Mm-hmm.
And now because I'm sure in the middle of it, you were trying to figure it all out, that it starts with, what do I really want?
Yeah.
Because there is free will, right?
Oh,
and
there's free will. Yeah.
Until you really say, this is what I want. Now, you may not, the universe can't give it to you, but
that's
then
right.
Say what you want and then let them design it for you, because that's what they do.
And amen. And I would say to you then, what I wanted was, I was real clear on this. I wanted my sister back. I wanted my sister healthy. I wanted the justice system not to be so biased. Okay, right? That's what I wanted. I also didn't realize then that I was going to have to redefine what I thought a miracle was, right? Because that would have been a miracle to me and my family. But what was ending up happening, and we'll talk about this in a minute, was so much bigger than that. And sometimes the universe also has an intention through you.
Oof. So the movie was really...
And you be careful what you ask for, because you'll get it.
Yeah.
They have an agenda too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Powerful story. The best is yet to come. You've already dropped some nuggets of things that nobody knew during the Hollywood version that you wouldn't tell anybody because they thought you were crazy.
Absolutely.
So we're going to take a 2-minute break. And when we come back, Libba is going to continue to tell the story about the nonprofit organization that she developed when she put out her intention, and more behind the scenes stories from her Lifetime movie, Bringing Ashley Home. And we're back on Intuition Unleashed with my guest, Libba Phillips. We were talking during the break about this whole notion of how you get people to pay attention when you have someone missing or who needs help. And the system, as a therapist myself, I've had many family members come to me and say, I really need help for, we want to do a family intervention for my sister who's an alcoholic or whatever. And the truth is, nobody's really you can have an intervention, but there's not going to be any teeth backing it up unless they've broken the law, right? And they're going to be there. And then you have your loved one arrested. And is that really what you want? But sometimes it's necessary because unless they've broken the law or in front of a judge, or unless they say they're going to harm themselves or someone else, they're probably not going to be able to get the help that they need, at least be hospitalized, which is maybe initially what they need.
Right.
Which is really
yes.
sad.
And and I think that that same could be said for
we need to get away from the feeling of do.
And, I was an advocate for over 20 years for this population, and, was a speaker for NAMI, National for Mental Illness, National Alliance for Mental Illness, and, really had a bird's eye view of the outcomes of not treating people, of not helping people. But the problem, though, begins with not being willing to see and not having that compassion. Because if we had the compassion and we understood that everyone is worthy, right, of care, then we may have a different system. And we also have to recognize that sometimes the person is an obstacle to treatment themselves, right? And so, the longer she was out there, the more difficult it would become, because sometimes, like I said, for the first 4 years, we couldn't really trace her or track her. And I would just say, just briefly, that over those 25 years, there were times, very briefly, that we would get her back. It didn't last. And that's the fallacy of thinking in a family where you can find someone. It's very, 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 very challenging. Okay, they need to be listed as missing. That's absolutely critical. But getting someone back and giving them a shower and a hot meal is not going to cut it. So, I really just, instead of sinking more into the despair that the problem is so big, I was like, oh, I need to tell someone. And I still couldn't really get Ashley on the news in those beginning years, right? And so my intent, I kept hearing in my mind, well, you need to get in front of Jennifer Smith. And I'm thinking, wow. I stopped asking, who said that? I just would say, okay, I just write it down. Now, Jennifer Smith at the time was a very popular news anchor in our community. She had a trademark red suit. You couldn't miss this woman. And if you had something that needed to be said, she's your gal. And I just had it in my mind, but I'm like, would kind of volley back and say, well, that's all fine and good. But, you see this track record of not being able to get into the news. Like, people still don't really care about this, right? And again, it just kept coming. And I'm like, okay, I know how this works by now. It's been a couple of years of this stuff.
You're not going
to as life goes on, I had
it's not so
appointment that I went to.
Be in a society
and I'm
like,
still kind of
like
getting
this
this one,
and
that'd
still
be great,
do the work.
but I don't really.
First, because we don't have time.
Can't you just see her? I'm like, yeah,
if
I
you
can
work
see her
8 hours,
in my mind,
you have no
but
way to show
now
them.
what?
Yeah, it's true.
So I
tell
get
you,
to the doctor's appointment.
what is it? I don't believe in it,
and,
because you have no way to show
she
them.
says
Yeah,
to me,
it's
hey,
true.
how are you doing?
You
And, you have to
not
use your discernment
easy
because
to find the
you can't
time
just kind
and
of tell
space to
everything.
do it.
Like
It takes
the
time,
grocery
at least
store.
for
How are
me.
you doing? You don't really
And
say, well.
so
My
it
life is
required
melting
some
into a big puddle
time
on the
to
floor, and if
also
you see me, that's
understand what it is and really
but I just
trust
felt
it,
like I
because
could trust her.
intuition,
even though she
you
was a
don't have
doctor,
any
and I thought,
proofs
well,
of
she
it.
tried
So
to
of
prescribe me
course
something,
people tell you,
because
oh,
I'm crazy,
what is it? I don't
that's
believe in it,
another
because you have no
conversation.
way to show them. Yeah,
And so I
it's
tell
true.
her, I said, my sister's missing, and I give her the whole thing, the whole spiel, and she says, well, what do you need? And I said, well, I need to get on the news because this is a bigger problem. And my sister needs to be listed as missing. We're helping other families. I've started this nonprofit, and I'm sort of giving her the whole thing. And she goes, well, like, who do you want to talk to? And I said, well, Jennifer Smith,
This is your
and
doctor?
she said, yeah. And she says, well, that's kind of interesting. And she puts her thing down, her clipboard down, and she says, so this is kind of weird. She goes, but Jennifer Smith is my best friend. And I can't promise anything, but after this meeting, I'm going to call her, if that's okay with you. And I said, okay. And she said, now I can't promise anything, but and I said,
what
okay.
do you want people to know?
So, but I never said,
be open-minded.
The angels have been telling me this whole time. I didn't say shit. I didn't say that. Okay. So I get dressed. I'm going out to the car. I get into the elevator. I go down to the parking lot. I get in my car, and I'm like, okay, is this real? Like, legitimately, is this real? This is how I would tell people, like, how do people know signs are real? Look for the evidence. Okay. Because here it comes. I'm in my car. I pull out of the parking lot. I get onto the frontage road of the highway, and I say, God, is this real? I see a giant city bus pass me, okay, on the driver's side, and the big, beautiful face of Jennifer Smith at News 10 in her trademark red suit is smiling at me.
Oh my God.
The bus goes down. Oh yeah, it gets better. I'm crying. I'm like, okay, do not dangle false hope in front of me. Like, dude, at this point, God is still my frenemy, right? I don't really know if I can trust, but I thought that's kind of a major flex, what you're doing there. Showing me that, that's kind of a big thing. I get home. I have a voicemail on my phone. It's Jennifer Smith. And guess who was on the news that weekend?
No.
Yours truly. Yes. 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 As you and God is my witness. Yes. So here's the thing. Intent matters. It's okay to have doubt, right? Like if I said to you, I want to manifest $1 million. Oh, I'm thinking about $1 million. I can think about it. I can see that basket of money right on my front porch. It doesn't work like that, right? But here's the part where I will use the word co-creation. You have the essence of what you're wanting. And in those days, I was reading a little bit of Louise Hay because I was also trying to inundate my mind with positive things because I didn't have positive people around me at the time, except for my friend who helped me file the report. And I'm thinking, okay, the essence of this would be getting in front of Jennifer Smith, getting featured on the news, and I was. So sometimes it works out like that, right? And we can talk about the movie in a minute, because that's kind of a segue to letting go of your intent.
Yes.
And seeing what the universe comes back with.
So what you're saying is like, I'm going to put out the bigger message. I want to find Ashley. I want to bring her home. Right. Yeah. And you just kind of let it go and say, all right, universe, I don't know how this is going to happen, but you know more than me. Work your magic.
Well, and in those days, you know, it was still so new at this. I was so questioning everything. It wasn't like this very clear manual, you know, if you will. It was more me. It was sort of like a game of charades, you know, like, what are they showing me?
Putting the pieces together.
Yeah, this is what I'm feeling. And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe we want to go a little bit bigger. So I, one day, was standing at the grocery store in the checkout line, and I won't mention the case here, but there was a case of a very well-known missing person at that time that was on the cover of People magazine. And I thought, well, you know, I was kind of aggravated, and I was like, you know, you can't, you know, it took me all this time just to get into this local news. How am I ever going to get into this? You know, because we don't know where Ashley is. You know, she could be anywhere. She could be anywhere. And that's what I was learning with lots of transient people being lost. You know, a lot of times, you know, if somebody would find their missing son who had schizophrenia, they'd find him in Chicago, and he was from, you know, Miami. So I'm thinking, you know, well, I wonder if I could get in People magazine. And I'm like, well, that's a dumb idea. That'll never happen. You know, that's like,
even with what's happened, you're still skeptical.
I'm still skeptical. So I'm like, okay, how do I do that? So, you know, you try to do like the usual things, like the logic things, like, okay, well, who, you know, do I know anybody? Is there any, you know, does anybody want to talk to me? So one day I just sat down, you know, as I'm kind of a creative person. So I wrote a story. Now, it wasn't my story, but, you know, it was my story, but I wrote kind of a copy paste thing. I took up the People magazine. I put the logo on there, you know, kind of put all this stuff together, like as if they were writing a story about the case and they were writing a story about the message. And nothing happened for like a year. I had to, you know, I just kind of threw it in like a, you know, notebook, and I just kind of, you know, and in that year, my life was imploding. My then marriage was falling apart. I decided to make the move back to the East Coast. It was just too much stress coming back and forth, looking for my sister. I was losing my other job. I had left my corporate, you know, job because I was doing the nonprofit work, which was a labor of love. And there were plenty of people around me that were not supporting that and did not, you know, just thought I was nuts.
Yep.
And, you know, forget trying to talk about angels out loud. You know, I was doing that maybe on weekends, you know, with trying to like share with smaller groups, you know, that were interested in, you know, intentions and affirmations, that kind of stuff. So fast forward to a year, I've moved back to the East Coast. And almost a year to the day, I get a phone call from a reporter at People magazine. They want to send a photographer. They want to send a reporter. They want to do a story. And that was the first of 3 times. I've actually been in the magazine a couple times since that time.
What? All right. We're going to put this show notes when those were. And you want to know how you write a book. Libba, I want to know.
Well, so it wasn't the reporter wrote my story in there. But what I'm saying to you is, this is when I started to realize, you know, and it did take me a really long time. So at the time I'm thinking, oh, wow, that was kind of cool. But this is where the ego mind can trip us up, right? Because we think we want this thing or this shiny thing. But this is what I would volley back to you or to the audience is, get really clear, not only on your intent, but get clear on what is the essence of what you think that thing will bring you, right? It wasn't the $1 million. It was get this issue in the national eye. Get this issue out there. Maybe it's going to help bring my sister back. maybe it's going to help bring somebody else's daughter back. Maybe nobody else in another town knows about this homicide case of a 14-year-old girl that nobody's been able to figure out who she is. Then she was left in a dumpster, right? Those were the everyday things. I know that's harsh to say out loud, but those were the everyday kind of things that I was seeing. I knew it was bigger than me.
Can you talk a little bit about the nonprofit, because we still haven't named it?
Yeah. Yeah. So the nonprofit is called Outpost for Hope. Today, it exists as a website resource. I do not actively run the nonprofit anymore, but I did do that for 20 years. And the whole purpose of the mission was to shine the light on this population of people that we call the missing. And these are people that typically get lost in the cracks, oftentimes have some kind of danger to themselves or others, some type of mental health issue or some type of addiction. Sometimes they're runaways, people that are not necessarily going to be listed as missing. And, it's a big problem because, when I was very active in the organization, what I was discovering then, now the numbers may have changed, but I'll just give you some numbers, from the last check. We have over 40,000 unidentified John and Jane Does in this country. What that means is, it's not like on that show CSI, where they find a body, they run the fingerprints in some magical system, and they discover this is Bob Smith from Utah, right? It doesn't really work like that, because unless they're in the system so that they can be matched to someone, right? So there's a lot more to it than that, but we weren't really trying to reinvent the wheel. I wasn't trying to invent a new database. I was trying to shine the light on these problems, trying to support other efforts that were, out there to try to get people listed as missing, trying to shine the light on homeless. So I was speaking to people like guardian ad litems, in the foster care system, to try to figure out why, Sally Johnson, who was a runaway, was never reported missing. And this is the problem where we're facing today, and we were facing it then, is there so much trafficking that's going on? I mean, imagine a homeless woman that's on the streets. She's estranged from her family, or there's some reason why there's no missing persons report. Maybe the cops didn't want to take it, or maybe her family didn't report her missing. And she has a baby because, trafficking. And no one knows the child exists. We call them the kids off the grid. But there is a population of people that do, and they're predators. So it's a conversation for probably another time, but I just really was wanting to sound the alarm bell.
Yes.
Right? It was very dark. And this is the thing that I would say to you is, at those days, I was like a mad kid on an out-of-tune piano, wanting to play as loud as I could, like, listen to me. God said, hey, practice your piece. Someday there'll be an audience and they'll be ready to listen. And I'm like, easy for you to say, right? But, it became, Outpost for Hope eventually became sort of we were kind of like the last resort, where we were sharing information with families, kind of a how-to. Here's how you need to get your loved one listed as missing. Here's the language you need to use in order to do that. That kind of thing. And, teaching people that they had to change their idea of success, like a success story, to have, right? So a success story might be that that your brother's sleeping in the park, or it might be that your daughter was identified, or it might be that, you were able to successfully get someone back and have treatment and, be an ally in their recovery. But anyway, it's very, very meaningful work. And I definitely I got to a place, like I said, when I moved back to the East Coast, I got to a place where I was starting my life over. I had a baby on the way. And I said to God, hey, I've been making this documentary with my friend for a number of years. We've been recording, like I said, police interviews and forensic people, and just the things that we were discovering. It wasn't anything glamorous. But in my mind, intent, I'm thinking, we're going to take this to Sundance. We're going to change laws, right? We're going to, it's going to be a whole thing. And I was starting to speak at law enforcement conferences and stuff like that at that time. But I'm thinking to myself, I don't know how this is going to happen, because I got like a baby. I got to figure out how I'm going to, move forward with life. And, when you go through a trauma, like having somebody that you love be missing, it absolutely colors every area of your life. I lost a job, I lost a marriage, right? This was not a path with rose petals in front of me and sparkling lights. This was God saying, hey, the light at the end of the tunnel, hey girl, that's you. You're going to dig it with your bare hands. I'll be there for you at the end.
Noah building an ark, and everybody's like, what the hell? What do you mean?
Right. And I'm going, you got me, right?
That's called faith.
But I said,
faith.
Yeah, I said, God, yeah. I said, we don't have the budget to make this film. We don't, now I'm living on the opposite coast. And, my friend did so much, and we're just like, oh, just what do we do? So I sat down, and this is kind of what I teach clients now, is, a method that kind of came to me over time. It wasn't kind of a weekend thing, of how to navigate and get some type of connection with the divine so that I would know the next step. And so I just wrote down, I know this issue matters to you. I know the awareness of these problems matters to you. They matter to me. I can't do the documentary. There's no way. I don't know how to do it. Sundance, that sounds great, but it's not going to happen. Show me a way to tell the story in a way that matters. 3 days later, I got a call out of the blue from a producer who had seen the story in People magazine. They pitched it to Lifetime. They said, hey, what do you think about that? And I said, Lifetime, I don't know.
Is it going to be cheesy?
Is it going to be like, what? And I just started to think about it, and a download is kind of like, you can be the story consultant. You can work with the writer. You can, and the more I thought about it, I started thinking about, okay, they're going to take some creative license, but they have the budget to do the project. I don't. And they're telling me that AJ Cook is going to be in it, and Jennifer Morrison and Patricia Richardson. I'm going, that sounds pretty good. And that it's going to air in over 20 countries around the world. And they have a lifespan for about 10 years. I'm like, okay, let me talk to my manager. I'll get back to you. Okay. My manager is
your dog
right here. Yeah. And I say,
oh,
hey God. Yeah. Hey God, what do you think about this? And he's like, I think this is a good way to shine the light on this. Don't you? And I said,
but we're
okay,
talking
I'll do
about
it. I'll do it. It took 2 years to get greenlit. So there's a whole thing with all that, but and so this is what I would say to people is like you said, get clear on what you want. Release your attachment to how you think it's going to happen. It sounds so counterintuitive, right? Understand that if this is something bigger than, I just want to manifest a new car, right? You're navigating something that's really challenging the heck out of you. Understand that sometimes spirit that's an opportunity for them to partner with you to shine the light on something, right? That's how I look at it. I couldn't have done that by myself. That was not my doing, right? I couldn't have, quote, manifested this movie out of thin air.
And then Libba, this is what I learned last night when you and I were talking, because we literally have less than 5 minutes. So can you talk a little bit about just that little story that you told me yesterday, and then how you and I connected? Speaking of how it happened.
Right. So speaking of God as your PR manager, no, I know, and I've been feeling for quite a while, because, God communicated to me many, many years ago, someday you will tell the story behind the story. Someday you will step back from advocacy work and teach other people and share this with other people. I'm like, oh, you got to be crazy. I'm not doing that. Okay. So fast forward one day, this is very recently, I'm driving in my car and I'm feeling this, like I'm being shown speaking and things like that. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great, but I don't, where, and I'm at a stoplight. My daughter's with me in the car, and I hear the chirp on my phone, and I look down, and it says, "Hi, Libba, this is Becc at Intuition Unleashed. Would you like to be a guest on my show?" I'm like, "What?" And I I started crying, and my daughter goes, "Mommy, look." Now we're at a stoplight, mind you, so I'm not on my phone driving the car. There is a feather. I'm not kidding. There is a little feather floating next to the window on the passenger side. And this is what I would say to people. Anybody goes, "Oh, well, feather, sky, birds." This is how you know when signs are real. And you also have this other awareness. When you start to notice what you're noticing, then something that's so ordinary as a feather is actually something quite extraordinary. This was like the angels just bringing me this opportunity, and they're going, "Ask and ye shall receive."
And when you told me that story, I'm like, what you don't know on my end is that I'm also making the same prayer. I want to be able to tell stories that inspire, that teach people how to be able to use their intuition and how it can guide their lives. So I need to be able to have powerful stories. So you're not realizing that you're doing that for me as well, right? Because that gave me goosebumps from last night. So you now have a process that you share with others that you have that was downloaded to you.
Yes.
And it's called the Divine Messenger.
The Divine Messenger method. Yes. I teach this in my coaching. I teach this in my programs, and hoping to have a bigger program, group coaching, coming out in a few months. That being said, this is a process that was downloaded to me over time, over these decades, right? Where eventually I began to notice repeatable patterns, for how we can coordinate, partner with the divine in order to manifest the next step or help us get answers. This is what I would say to anyone that's listening. You do not have to be anyone special to receive divine guidance. You're already connected to the divine. You're already special. Yeah. You have the same capability as I do to receive information. It's just learning, it's being willing, and it's learning to trust. There's a big trust fall that has to happen. Hopefully it won't be very difficult for other people as it was for me, but it's absolutely possible.
But you used your pain to be able to develop something so beautiful. I give you so much credit for that, because a lot of people sort of just crumble when things happen to them. You figured out a way to be able to manifest teaching others. So tell people your website and where they can learn more about your Divine Messenger method.
They can come to the website. It's libbaphillips.com. And I would love to see you there. There's some great resources there for you. And I'm also on different social media platforms on Instagram, and love to connect.
And Lifetime and the People Magazine and lots of powerful things. I can't believe how fast that went by.
I know. Amazing.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Unleashed. I am so honored to be the guide to help you to put that story back out there. We will be back in 2 weeks when our guest will be Alyssa Hahn, and she's going to talk about the Theta healing method and some things that we don't even know that need to be healed in order for us to continue to grow and learn. So we will see you in 2 weeks. Libba, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Intuition Unleashed. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. But before you go, we have one little challenge for you. Most of us have sneaky little habits that hold us back and trip us up, so why not take this not at all uncomfortable quiz to find out what you do to derail yourself from achieving your goals and how you can call yourself out on your own BS. So get to know your self-sabotage specialty and take the first step towards getting out of the way of your own success. Just visit https:/becknelson.com/quiz and take the quiz now. That's becknelson.com/quiz, and we can't wait to see your results. As always, we'll be back next week with more Intuition Unleashed. We appreciate you. Thanks for listening.